Welcome back to the show. Fáilte Ash week on show, or if it's your first time listening, just welcome. Más rud é go bhfuil tú ag éisteacht don chéadúir. Fáilte. Hope the week is going well for you guys, or the weekend. If you're listening then, tásúlagam go bhfuil an teachtain ag dul go maith. Libse, nó fiú an deir seachtainna, más rud é go bhfuil tú ag éisteacht an sin. Everything good here in Seol. Tá gachard go maith an seo is Seol. The sun is shining. Our few weeks of bad weather is over. Tá an grain ag taitnamh. Tá an cúpla seachtain to drochaimsir a bhí agin. Tá siad críochnithe, I think, ceapam, and I hope. Tá súlagam. I was just listening to a brilliant song before starting this podcast. Bhí mé ag éisteacht le habhar an iontach díreach roimh an podcréile seo a thosaú. I'm sure most people listening, or most Irish people listening anyway, will know it. Tá mé cinnte go mbeidh sé ar eolas ag an gcuid is mó sa éarnaigh ag éisteacht, but maybe not all Irish people, beidir ní gach éarnach ag éisteacht. But I was listening to Rock and Roll Kids by Paul Harrington and Charlie McGeshigan, I think. Yeah, Paul Harrington and Charlie McGeshigan. So it was the song that won the Eurovision for Ireland in 1994. Saying Tauran a Bhuaí on Eurofish there in Níteag Nócha Cahar, one of the last times we won it, I think, back when we'd win it every year. Arash. So treibh sin nar bhíimiid ag buchans on Eurofish beag nach gach bliain. And oh, what a song. And it's brilliant now because I'm learning guitar. I suppose I can play a bit of guitar at this point, but I'm still learning. Tá mé an píosa guitar a cheanam ar éanos ag an buinte seo ag fós. Tá mé ag fólam whenever I hear a good song like that and I'm playing it a lot and get really into it. Nar chloisiam arán cosile sin agus bí mé ag éisteacht leis an tám ar fad. You know, everyone always has 3 or 4 songs I think at any given point they're listening to over and over again. Again, points tá cúpla arán beidir 3 nó chur arán a bhíonn tú ag éisteacht leis an tám ar fad. If there's any acoustic elements to any of them or any guitar in any of them, must rud é go bhfuil siad acoustic in ein chóir nó must rud é go bhfuil guitar ann nó untu. I can say, oh, I'm just going to look up the chords for this and try to learn it on the guitar in a way, maybe sometimes unsuccessfully. Tá mé chun na chords a chortú ar lína or ultimateguitar.com nó áitegan mar sin or somewhere like that, and I can just try. Tá mé in an iarachtaí anamh ar éanos chun an tauran a ólam. So I was having a bit of a mess around with that before starting work this morning. Riv an obair a thosaú ar maidin. And that kind of fits in, I suppose, to the theme of today's podcast. Is tócha gúil sé sin orúnach don téma atá agin inniu ar an budcréile, because I'm going to be talking a bit about nostalgia. By mé cláirt beginning faoi nostalgia. I know actually way back I did one episode on nostalgia, or vaguely related to the topic, so thosaitheoirí gnéarna mé agra an bháin ar nostalgia, nó bhí sé buinte ar plí éigen in some way le nostalgia. I don't know, maybe 1 year ago or 1.5 years ago at this point, beidir blian ó hin nó blian go le ó hin in ish. I remember talking about the PlayStation 1 and I think playing some old game on the PlayStation 1 and different memories. Ag immert cluthe éigen ar PlayStation a hain agus sean chuimhnaí ag teacht ar asfuigam coming back to me. But I wanted to speak about it, I suppose, in a slightly different way, in a bit of a bigger picture way today. If you make your larts faoi is slí beginning to friúil in you. And that's because over the last week or two, I've actually been going through reeling in the ears. So I think a lot of people will know what reeling in the ears is. So la seachtain nó go anús. Tá méid fécant ar lán reeling in the ears ar YouTube. Ceapan go mbeidh aithne ag an cuid is mó do dhaoine ar reeling in the ears. But for those of you who don't, díobh se nach bhfuil is agah cad atá i gceist le reeling in the ears. Basically, it's a TV program on RTE. So it's clár telefíse ar RTE in Ireland, in Éireann. And there's one episode for every year from 1962 up until 2020. So tá episode na agra an bháin like gach bliain on Níteag Seascadó from when RTE, I think, began, or when the public broadcaster began in Ireland. Anyway, Network 1, Network 2, nar thosaigh RTE, so on public broadcaster in Éireann, in Níteag Seascadó, until 2020, which is the most recent episode that's been made of it. Could see Gaeilge sa fiche agus sin an tagrán is déine a rinne siad. And every episode is about 25 minutes long, roughly. So tá gach episode thart there 25 is fiche, mar an sé ar fra 25 is fiche, lasts for about 25 minutes. And basically it just shows you the different things that happened that year in Ireland and across the world. Bunsach, tá spánan sa dit na rudí difriúla a tharla sa bhliain sin. Ní amháin in éireann ach timpplaen down freisin. So you might be watching, for example, I know, 1994. The 1994 episode on Tagran Lahai Níteag Nócha Cahar, and you'll see Ireland at the World Cup playing against Italy, Tatuhun Era, Gimmert in Aina Hidala, on Gurn and Ireland beating Italy with the Ray Housen goal, Eric Buchens and I na Hidala, leis an cool sin le Ray Housen, agus Tréise sin, Beidir an Taucon, Stachaintia, maybe the election in the US, or there was no election in the US that year. I'm getting my dates mixed up. But whatever else happened in 1994, Péradella a Harla in Níteag Nócha Cahar. Maybe the Downing Street Declaration. I think that was that here. Tasúlagam Garauche sa bhliain sin, I think it was, anyway. Or, you know, obviously in the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of stuff to do with the Troubles, the Seachtaigí, the Huchtaigí, Tá lán rudí buinse leis na Triplóidí, a lot of stuff to do with Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, the 2000s. You see things like 9/11, so fecinn tú rudí cosúil le 9/11 or whatever else was going on during that decade. I feel like I've forgotten everything that's happened now in the history of my lifetime and even of the last 50 years. Tá mé ag mothú gúil dearmid téantagam ar gachra de Harla le chuige bliain anús. Ach, you know, cogaí difriúla, so different wars, and Rwanda in the 90s and Bosnia and Serbia in the 90s and whatever. Péród a bhí sa nuacht go bunasach, whatever was in the news basically. And at the same time they'll play music from that year. Ag an am céanna bín ceol on bhliain sin ar siúl sa chúrla. So maybe again you're watching Ireland, the famous game against Italy from 94, sean scoil tú ag féchant ar an gluthe cáúil idir an Idal agus éire ó Níteag Nócha Cahar, and Oasis are playing in the background with Slide Away. Mar hampla tá Slide Away le Oasis sa chúlra, or Saturday Night le Wigfield, you know, that song from 1994 from the same year. Are on bhliain céanna. So it's really cool, really easy watching, and it's really fun. Anyone who wants to know more about Ireland, especially from this, but in general the world, you know, ain't no will beidir agiri atna níos fearr a chur star na hairan go háirithe on the Seachtaigí, na Huchtaigí, na Nócaigí, the 70s, 80s, 90s, a few na Seascaigí and the noughties as well, 60s and the noughties, or wants to know more about what was going on around the world. It's a really good program, really easy to watch and really entertaining. Tá seanna Siamsúil agus tá seanna éasca on fécinn share. But anyway, my point being, I was going through the episodes from the 80s, and I'm going to watch all the way through the 90s and 2000s. I've seen, I think, all of them before. Ceapan Gúiltíd ar fad feiceágam roimhe seo, but I just want to go through them again and go through them in order. Tá mé géirí dul tríd na cín ar fad san ordú ceart agus, yeah, just especially I'm trying to learn more about the Troubles this year and different Irish history stuff to make déanamh ton. Níos mó ólam faoi star na hairan agus na Triplóidí im lína. So I think something like that's an easy starting point. Tá sé éasca chun tosaí le rud éigean cosúil le rialing in the ears. And it's interesting nowadays looking back at stuff from the 80s, especially in Ireland. Tá sé similar fécinn siar ar rudaí ó na Huchtaigí go háirithe in éireann, but even just general international stuff, few rudí generalta, rudí idirnáisiúnta, that nowadays, and I think this has always been the case, by the way, ceapan go raibh sé i gcónaí mar seo, but it feels like now there's a lot of people kind of talking about the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, whatever, just the past in general. Bín lá daoine ag labhairt faoi, you know, am na roimhe seo, na Seachtaigí, na Huchtaigí, na Nócaigí, and kind of saying, oh, weren't things better then, and pointing at all the great things that we had back then and the things that we've lost and how the world has become worse. Agus constatá an down níos massa, agus na rudí atá caiilte agin, na rudí nachfuil agin inis, the things that we don't have now. And I think it's, you know, sometimes that's just in a kind of playful way about, oh, the fashion was better in the 80s, or the being sin, you know, just being say daoine ag maga, no, níl say aon rud dá éire, it's not anything serious. People say, no, the fashion was better, daoine gra nach around fashion níos fearr. But sometimes it's more serious, or to being say níos daoire freshen, you know, I don't want to get into politics, they may get laureates win bulletíocht, but we all know, or most of us probably know, nowadays that's a big thing, especially in terms of immigration. Let's say gohori hamad less on Imirka, and people saying about the 90s and 80s and they were better because less immigration and cultures were less diluted because marshinja and so on. We won't get into it, but it's funny looking back, let's say reading in the years, looking at what was happening in the 80s, tá sé groundwork fake and sir agus simul, ní small groundwork, simul, interesting more than funny, I think. Wow, like Ireland was grim in the 80s. Fi sé durcha in Aaron's na hugtaí. I'm sure listen, different people had different situations and some people had a great time in the 80s. Tá mi cinnte grow like tahid defriú like gach duine agus fi na hugtaí gohíntaach le lá daoine. But she wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Ní raibh sé gohíntaach agus an éasca le gach duine. Every episode, or almost every episode, being like gach episode, no gach agron to reading in the years. Sna hugtaí in the 80s. A big thing that comes up is unemployment in Ireland. At some points it was 15 or 20%. Éisteacht in Éireann, ag an mégan, bhí sé hart there. Cuaigteag fungate, no fiche fungate few. Almost every episode, there's bigger and bigger queues at the US Embassy. Tá scuaine níos fuidse agus níos fuidse bíonn na gach episode. Ag ambassadors in Ceisteanna because everybody wants to get out of the country. There's loads of interviews of people saying as soon as I get enough money, I'm leaving. Nar atá mo chóchan airgad tá méid fágáil. It was very unsafe in a lot of ways. Bhí sé míshábhailse in Land Ballydifriúla, of course, more so in the north of Ireland. Níos mó beidir I dúscart na hÉireann. You know, listen, if you were living in Derry or Belfast, certainly back then, más rud é gur out tú I de chónaí in Nera. No, in mail first ag an am sin, you know, every time you left your house, you thought, I might not come back this evening. Chance like my mare rash unlocked because there were bombs going off, there were shootings, innocent people getting killed. Vi boomall nua gach cúpla seachtain, vi daoine neamhcheantacha agus vi siad ag fáil bás, dún warriúid. Mbearla and Triplógy agus Mbearla gachrod a bhí ar siúil ag an am because of the troubles and everything that was going on, and even there was some of that in the south as well. Bhí písaide sin sa deisceart freisin ag an am céine. For a lot of people it was a society that wasn't fair at all. Ha lán daoine ní rá an tuchaí fair also ar chur a bit. It was completely illegal to be gay in Ireland at the time. Bhí sé céad fan géad in Linn, chun bheith gay, chun bheith homogenéiseach ag an am. You couldn't get a divorce if you were with someone who maybe you didn't want to be with anymore. Ní rá tú an colscar all, más rud é gur rá tú le duine éigen nach rá tú géirí a bheith lo níos mó. And again, I'm not saying it was worse in the 80s. Maybe I shouldn't have said it was grim earlier. Peter ní rá an ceart agam rá níos luha gra sé grim agus gra sé dearcha. I don't mean it was a terrible time or a terrible place to live. Ní mé gra grát uafásachaí agus grá gach duine in Ísle Brí. But I suppose my point is, you look back and you think, well, yeah, maybe there were some things that were better, beidir gra rudí agus bhí siad níos fearr, but at the same time there were a lot of things and they were a lot worse. Bhí lan rudí agus bhí siad a bhfad níos massa, and especially for specific people in society agus go háirithe like daoine áirithe sa tír agus sa sochaí. It was worse, and people didn't have the same rights in a lot of ways that they do now. Ní rá na cearta céine ag a lán daoine mar atá acu anois. So I just thought that was interesting, and it's an interesting topic to think about. Tá sé simul chun smaoine faoi. Again, that it's so easy to kind of, I think to yourself in your mind, oh, 10 years ago my life was better, 20 years ago this country was better, 30 years ago whatever, the world was moving in a better direction. You know, de mlíon ó hin bhí me héal níos fearr, fiche bliain ó hin bhí an tír níos fearr, trocha bliain ó hin bhí an down nó bhí an Seol ag dul I dro níos fearr agus níos dearfaí, a more positive direction. But again, you know, in the 80s and the 70s, there was always the threat of nuclear war. Ag only bhí an bagart sin go méach coga nucleach. because there was more and more from the USSR and the US and expanding, and the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s and Cuban Missile Crisis na seascadí agus bhí siad de crothú agus ag déanú níos mó bumálaithe nó bumálaithe ní é sin an focail fearc, níos mó missiles agus there were always positives and negatives of every, I suppose, decade and every age. Gach ray, no gach de mlína, bhí buntáistí agus mí buntáistí. There were pros and there were cons, but yeah, I suppose it is very, and I probably do it myself, of kind of thinking, but didn't we have it great 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or we had this or whatever, and nach raibh again hintach fé blian ó hin, no trucha blian ó hin, agus bhí sé seo agin. Even more recently, you can look back at just before COVID, tá tú ná fécinn siar beidir dúrach ribh COVID, and you can say, things were way cheaper, but a lot of salaries were the same as now. Bhí rudí óhád ní saoire ach bhí an tórstáil more or less mar atá sé inis. You can always look back even to 2 or 3 months ago and you can say, wasn't that great? But I think whatever it is about human nature, it's easy to remember the good things, but maybe also easy to forget the bad things. Tá sé éasca an chuimhnú na rudí maithe ach freisin éasca an dearmadí dhéanú na droch rudí agus na rudí nach raibh chomh deas, the things that weren't so nice. I'm also going back through Father Ted at the moment. I'm really in a kind of 80s, 90s kind of geeky Irish phase, going back watching television programs and all sorts of music like Rock and Roll Kids. Because I was born 2000, so I'm nostalgic on that stuff, but maybe that's my nostalgia. Rugus of lean gáhíle me, so chail me amach the rudí sin. But again, I'm not saying I was unfortunate to miss out on that, but I'm not saying I was fortunate either. Ní mé gra an tá chun chailú amach sinach ag an am céine, ní mé gra nach rá an tá agus gra an tá chun rugus of lean or rugame, because every generation is different and it's always impossible to know what life would have been like if you were born 10 years earlier, 10 years later. Gnáthleagan, tá siad difriúil agus tá sé gcónaí, tá sé dó dhéanta chun is a bheith agat, cin chuí a bheith an Seol más rud é go rugu hu beidir 10 mlína níos luha nó 10 mlína níos déine. But as I mentioned, I'm going through Father Ted at the moment because I'm always, my friends were always referencing Father Ted. Le machordsa gcónaí bí muid ag déanú tagartí with Father Ted and quoting it agus ar gá línsa friúla ón show. But I've never actually really watched the full series, or a lot of the episodes I would have never seen. The lans in the episode, the Lilshid Fekia agam. I think a lot of people in Ireland have the same thing actually. We know so much about it, but we've never really sat down and watched it properly. Tá made sin Erolas agin fwy Father Ted ach nílmid, tris síos agus an rud omláin eáil. And they're all free up on YouTube, or most of them are free up on YouTube. Tá chuid mó acu le fáil siar an aisce ar YouTube, so it's really good. If you get to the end of the day and you're just like, sure, I'm not sure what to do, má thuircinn tú ar dhearr an lei agus tá tú níl mé cínsa cad a dhéanamh mé, sit down on the couch, throw on an episode of Father Ted. They're only 25 minutes, I think, roughly less than half an hour, and he's slú ná láthór ar énos, throw it on the telly, throw it on YouTube, put it on the laptop, whatever. And so good. You forget how good it is. Jenna Dermot kickle ma agus atá sé, and it's again such easy watching, but in a really genius way. Tá sé cóhhéasca an fécinn séach, tá sé cócliste ag an am céine. So I'm watching that, and even that, I suppose people might say, nach raibh sé níos fearr san nócaidí. Wasn't it better in the 90s with TV shows in Ireland and Network 1, Network 2? They made these great shows like Father Ted. Bhí siad crothú na show na iontacha seo cosúla Father Ted. But there's a few things there. Firstly, I bet you when Father Ted came out, people weren't saying that, right? Tá mé cinsa nach raibh daoine ag rá rudí cosúla sin nó tháinig Father Ted amach. People weren't like, there's a new episode of Father Ted tonight, in the year 1995, whatever. So Lean needs ag nócha chuig. Ní rá daoine ag rá, tá episode nua of Father Ted anocht. Like, this is so much better than what was made 10 or 20 years ago in the 80s and 70s. Tá sé seo bhd níos fearr ná cad a rinne siad na hachtaidí, na seachtaidí, 10 mlína nó 20 bliain ó hin. And also there's the fact of, well, yeah, if you were into mainstream comedy, if we're going to call Father Ted mainstream comedy, must really grow simagd a comedy a grán cosúla sin grán says mainstream ag an am. Okay, you would have liked Father Ted, chance gur hadn't Father Ted lat, But let's say if you weren't into that, there was so little else on. Ní raibh mBéarla le ar siúl. So one of the great benefits nowadays is if you're into something quite specific, let's say you don't like those type of comedies, but you love anime, let's say, or something from the other side of the world. Go thosaitheoirí agus go tú gafa le anime and kind of something specific. Well, you can get as much of that as you want and put it on the laptop and put it on Netflix or different, whatever, services, services streaming difriúla, no ar an ríomhphost tá tuan ar chur siúl, and you can watch different episodes and watch stuff you really like and stuff that's specific to you and will help you in your life agus rudí a charóí leat I a héal hain, and you're not kind of left out. It's not just, oh, this is what's on the national broadcaster and that's it. Níl tú I a aon ar más rudí nachhfuil sim agat cadatá ar siúl ar RTE, no TV3, no aon rud mar sin. And there's disadvantages. I remember speaking about this on the podcast. Maybe it was that nostalgia episode. Chance grabh sé ar on episode sin, but I think it was on an early episode about television actually. Ceapam grabh sé ar episode eile faoin telefís. Probably episode 10 or 15 or something. Beidir episode iver 10, no episode iver chuid. I was saying one of the disadvantages is there's too much now on TV and available to watch on Netflix. Tá numerical le fáil ar Netflix agus ar an television. We're not watching the same things. Apart from sport, we don't go into work the next morning and say, oh, did you see the episode of this last night? Because everybody's watching something different. Tá gach duine fake and rud éigean difriúil, and society becomes kind of, oh God, we're getting way too serious here. When I mention society, tá muid wadro Gaeilge, also they're being made large swing sucky. But anyway, it's all just a laugh. It's all just a few opinions, and not even opinions, just thoughts and ramblings. It's nothing serious. Níl ann ach cúpla tírim agus cúpla smaoin of this ró Gaeilge, and I hope you guys realise that tásúlagam go duggan sibh é sin faoi deara that I'm never trying to make really anything too serious. I'm just kind of rambling on about whatever comes to mind. Níach ag labhairt faoi péród a hagan chuig mincín agus a rihnlum ag an am. But yeah, sometimes that takes away, that there's too much available, and maybe we're not grateful for what is available. Beidir nach bhfuil muid buíoch as cad atá ar fáil. There's advantages and disadvantages. The buntáistí agus míbhuntáistí leis, and I think it's an interesting topic, nostalgia. Topic simile, because again, it's very easy to just think, oh, this was great, or that was great, or that was better. But again, you can't have the good without the bad. Níl tú ná na rudí maithe a thógáil gan na drochrudaí. So again, you can say, oh, the 80s in Ireland was better because there were slightly less rules. You could get away with more things, and there was a bit more crack or whatever. Ní raibh méid sin rialacha agus bhí tú ná níos mó rud a dhéanamh, bhí beaganí níos mó crack agat. Today there's too much bureaucracy and health and safety and insurance agus rudí mar sin, and tá na marcha slándal agus orchas agus an marcha béim ar an sláinte, too much emphasis on health agus gachar eile. Both of those opinions are valid, whether you're pro that or against that. Tá dá tuairm sin, tá siad ceart go leor, agus tá an ceart agat tá na tuairmí sin a bheith agat. You have the right to kind of have those opinions, and at the same time you can't really say, okay, well, I want that back without taking other stuff back that was horrible stuff going on at the time, like the Troubles, rudí cosúil leis na tribology, or things you would never think of. Rudí nach mín tú ag smaoineh faoi really, like armed bank robberies were a big thing in the 70s and the 80s in Ireland. So every time you went into a bank, you were a lot more nervous then, I'm sure, than you would be now. Bheadh tú bhd níos nervísí ag an am ná mar bheith fá nish, because you'd be thinking someone could come in here and hold me at gunpoint and tell me to give my name and whatever else, agus rálam, oh, caiitú danam a hortdom, agus caiitú argad a hógáil amach, you have to take off money and all of that. So, it's always more complicated. People like to make things black and white. You can only be DNA geary ruddy a dhéanamh dubh agus bán, but it's always more complicated because sometimes in Ireland you have the opposite discussion. Orintha being on G-Sport agus an óráds, no an smaoin of a stocha sin an focalas fear, the kind of idea, no chunceap, the concept on chunceap eile, gur ruddy wadnís massa, the things were way worse at the time, and that huge problems with the church and whatever bhí fáibanna leis an aglis, and that it was a very dark and horrible place to live in, gur seanna dorcha agus áit uafásach chun a bheith the chonaíonsaí. But again, you know, there were maybe a lot of positives that maybe people looked after each other more and people were more social. Beidir gur daoine ní speisialta, beidir gur daoine chuineal súil amach le haid daoine eile. I don't know, when I was born in the year 2000, rugus of lín Gaeilge me, so you know, when you're talking about the 70s, 80s, 90s, it's tough to know for me. And I'd be interested in your guys' opinions on Vic Simagam. We're Gwidge Thormy, so if you guys want to leave a comment on Spotify, if you're listening on Spotify, or a comment on YouTube, if you're listening on YouTube, since the podcast is now available there as well, Marielle Goil on Pudcraila La Fall on Shin, you can leave a comment there or send a message over on Instagram, Learn Irish Online, or leave a comment here on the Patreon, and I might read out a few of them next week if I get a few interesting ones in. Mas rud goithi me cúpla ceann simul. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting thinking about nostalgia, thinking about kind of the role it plays, I suppose, for a lot of people today, and thinking about the past and how cool the past can seem, or sometimes how dark the past can seem, when in reality maybe the past isn't that different from what we have right now. You know, beidir nach bhfuil rudí ó fiche bliain ó hin, trucha bliain ó hin, ro dhifriúil ó cadtágin. And ish, we all still get up in the morning, we go out for a coffee, well, I go out for a coffee anyway, and I do my work roughly 9 to 5, and you know, being my gober ó nígatí a chuig, and I meet my friends for lunch or for a pint, being my búla na machorza on lón a bheith agin, no pianta a bheith agin, and you know, a lot of the things we do every day, it's no different than maybe what people were doing 30 or 40, 50 years ago. Trucha, Caracha, no Quaiga, bliain ó hin. So maybe the world isn't too different, but if you're reading the news and reading social media all the time, maybe it feels like it is. Anyway, I hope none of that was too heavy. The other two versions of the podcast weren't as heavy as this. The round all like an ella, Jen Foot Crayla on Sockton Show, Cove Trum, Mar on Lagan Shaw. But this one wasn't too heavy equally. Ni round on Kian Shaw, Ro From Erenos. So that's it, guys. As always, if you want to get in contact with the show, best way of doing it, you can do it all the ways I mentioned there. Totamanan a and of Savali a Louis May on Shin, but honestly the best way is send me an email at liam.learnirishonline@gmail.com. Agus tána nascana hís le gachrod buinse le Learn Irish Online. The links are below for everything to do with Learn Irish Online, really, regardless of where you're listening. So big thank you for listening. Gurmi Lamakiv as a bheith éisteacht. I'll speak to you next week on whatever date that will be. That will be on Darragh me fiara, the 12th of February. Hope you guys have a good week. Tásúlagam go mai seachtain iontaach agah fad. Goodbye and God bless. Slán agus Bannacht.